Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared Podcast. Hello, everybody. Mark and Steve coming at you with episode 259 on the PBSC podcast. It's great to be with you today. We've got a cool topic, one that, so today's topic is interesting because it's kind of an amalgam of events. We had a great submission that came in from a partner, and we're going to read through that in just a second, but it happened to kind of coalesce really well with a session that Mark actually had in his clinic just recently. And as we got to talking about it and looking at it, we thought this would be really good to kind of dial into and look at this concept from a little bit of a different verbiage in a different way than maybe we have in a while. So here we go. We'll go ahead and we'll read this. So again, this is from a partner, and this is what she says. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for all the work you guys do. It is only because of how relatable you are that my addicted husband was able to admit he had a problem, and that is huge. Which we really appreciate. We know that that is the case for a lot of the guys and in some cases partners that we work with. So we appreciate the kind words. And if you do like that, by the way, that is how we operate and Dare to Connect. So we'd love to have you come take a look at that. We'll have more info on that later in the program. She goes on to say, it has been 18 months since D-Day, or Disclosure Day, for those who haven't heard that term before. And my husband has been in recovery since February and sober since June 1st. So depending on when you're, just as of time of recording, that's roughly between 10 and 6 months. So 10 months and 6 months respectively for each of those dates. I have been in recovery since Disclosure or Discovery Day myself. We had an incident last week where he was heading away on a work trip, which I was anxious about to begin with, as many partners are. And while at work, I got an email from a movie receipt, which contained some nudity and sex scenes in it. So there was some sexual content in the movie. So she got a receipt saying that he'd gone to one of these movies. Now, keep in mind, he's on a work trip, okay, so he's alone, which, as we've talked about on this program before, is definitely not the ideal scenario for recovery, and in many ways is a huge set of triggers all on its own, and we do have podcasts about that that you can search. This was not the first time, she goes on to say. We have had arguments around movie choices, and along with everything else that we have been dealing with in terms of his addiction, this was my final straw. So for her, right, and for many partners, you can get behind that, right? It's not just this one thing, right? It's all of the other things, lack of safety, lack of trust. But then she goes on to talk about this. This particular issue for me was that because even though I do actually was an issue because even though I do actually trust that he would have skipped the raunchy scenes or the the triggering or dangerous scenes for him, given his background, there is no consideration. Okay, now there's the key word there, consideration. We're going to come back to that, for how his actions might make me feel. This has been a common complaint throughout our marriage. I would love to know if you have any advice on how we can get through this with minimal hurt to me. I feel as though I have so much compassion for how he got here, but it doesn't seem to go both ways. The sobriety is there, but the selfishness and entitlement doesn't seem to be shifting. I have asked for an in-home separation for now because I just truly can't keep going like this. How can I get him to understand why these things hurt so much? It's a really, really good submission. And just a couple of things I wanted to point out. And I'd love Mark's thoughts too before we even jump into this, because I really like how she phrased some of these things. And she's, and she says here at the end, and I wanted to make an emphasis on this. I have asked for an in-home separation. Now, many of you listening, right, if depending on your dynamic, there are some of you who may be listening that might be thinking to themselves, whoa, okay, back up a minute. He's sober. He has been for some time. We don't have a date on that in here, but it's kind of inferred that that's been going on for a while, right? There's been progress. She gets a movie receipt. They get in an argument. She's asking for an in-home separation. Isn't that kind of flying off the handle a little bit? Like, isn't that just sort of, going a little out there? And if you were to look at this on the outside and not have an understanding about how these issues can compile, how they can impact a person, and if you don't understand this concept of consideration that we're going to talk about here today, it very much could hit that way. God knows it would have hit Mark and I that way at once upon a time. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. You want what? Hey, do you know what Jim down the road is doing? If you had any idea what Jim is doing right now, you would be kissing my feet, grateful for a movie ticket, right? Or whatever the case is. We've been there, we've done that. So we can connect with that way of thinking, but we're going to talk about this as you can see in the title, right? The powerful potential of consideration in the recovery and healing process. That's what today is all about.
Yeah, if you, as Steve said, without the context of this, if you were to look at this situation just isolated in a vacuum all by itself, go, wow, was that significant enough for an in-home separation? But you have to realize that you have to take in the big picture. And you have to, as Steve said, all of the piling up. We refer to it as complex trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, not just a single event that happens in these situations with an addict and a betrayed partner.
We talk so much on this program, on PBSC and in our Dare to Connect program about trust, right? And about safety and what it takes to build those. And this consideration concept ties in with many of those concepts. It's kind of a different way of looking at it, but it encapsulates so much of what we talk about in other PBSC episodes, what we will continue to talk about. This considering piece to me means several things. It does mean empathy on its core level,
For sure.
to some degree, right? And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But it's kind of, when I think of this consideration piece, what I almost think of is an amalgam between two concepts that we talk about all the time in Dare to Connect. Empathy, what that looks like, how it works, the barriers around it, right? All those things. We spend a lot of time on that. Then the other piece is this leading out concept.
Yes.
That we describe a lot as well, right? It's not just the ability to, when I'm working with guys, because I've worked with many guys who are operating under a similar dynamic that Mark is operating under. For many of the guys that Mark and I work with, I think that, what should we call it? The non-emotional or logical or maybe logistical, whatever term fits best, elements to consideration, I think for many guys is fairly readily apparent fairly quickly. In like a logical, factual way, many of the guys that we work with are able to fairly quickly glom onto, okay, when I do X, it has this impact on my partner. Right? Like she hurts when I do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Or she feels good when I do A, B, or C. Right? They are able to make like those logical leaps. And that is part of this process. Okay. But it's
Absolutely.
it's a baseline, right? And and again, we're going to talk about the barriers in a second, but what we're talking about here is taking that as a look at that like the foundation of the house. But consideration is where you pull in the actual empathy piece, which is emotionally connecting with what's going on in the part of the other person, and then pairing it with what? The leading out of how do I take this to a proactive level?
Well, let's add some other words in here. And by the way, I'm glad you said what you did, Steve. You guys, if you're going to attempt this, and let's just say it like it is, this is an advanced relationship skill. Make no mistake. But if I don't have some good, solid sobriety, if I'm not working the basics of recovery and being sober, please don't try to go here. Right?
Yeah, I'm going to get swallowed up by my shame or my
Yeah.
self-loathing or my possibly the selfishness, right? The other elements of this aren't going to be lined up to where I can
They're,
really do this to a full depth.
they're not.
Yeah.
So as we talk about this, considering my partner, and I love that you use the phrase leading out. It involves using my intuition. It involves being proactive, seeing what could happen 4 steps down the track here instead of just reacting when it happens. And guys will often look at me and they'll get so frustrated. Mark, I'm doing all the things I'm putting this in quotes, I'm supposed to be doing. What's her problem? I've been sober for 2 years. I check in every day. I have a travel plan before I go out of town on work. I'm doing all the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing. I can't get my arms around this touchy-feely, emotional, ethereal, mysterious place. And they really do struggle with it. I struggled with it. It's like, what does she want from me? And it took me a long time to get to the place that this is more of an art than it is a logical science. Now, the logical science is important. Let's make sure we're not misunderstood. I do need to be doing.
Well, you have to go there, right? As a
Got to.
precursor, right? Like it has to make logical sense first, but we do. And we know that if somebody was listening to this podcast without the barriers that we addicts struggle with, this may sound fairly elementary, right? It might even be organic. But you have to keep in mind that even though, again, there's a significance to this, and there's no excuses here, there are reasons why addicts across the board struggle with this so much. And in fact, that's probably a good point, right? To kind of jump in. I mean, what are the barriers, right? What gets in the way of us guys being able to do this, right?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, in many ways, it's the same barriers that got us into addiction in the first place. Okay. This lack of feeling, this lack of connecting emotionally, this lack of, right, those things. Hey, everybody. It's your PBSC podcast co-host here, Mark and Steve, with a special message to all of you about our revolutionary recovery program for addicts, spouses, and couples, Dare to Connect. Nearly every day, we receive messages from subscribers in the program, couples who are just like you, trying to heal from the devastating effects of sex addiction, pornography addiction, and betrayal trauma. Recently, we actually received an amazing feedback message of hope from a current D2C subscriber, and we wanted to just share it with you quickly. She says, "This is a partner. I am grateful that while you fully address this addiction as a disease and that it takes over the addict's life, you both also fully address the impact their behaviors and their betrayals have had on the partner. Your words and teachings on partner betrayal trauma opened my husband's eyes to his responsibilities and role in helping me heal. He has stepped fully into the gap to lead this process, and we are making such progress. I originally started D2C by myself as my addict partner was not interested in anything I had to say about recovery. He was working recovery through another program, but his work was off limits to me. I had listened to so many of your PBSC podcasts, and I realized that I needed more than I was getting through my own support group. So I signed up for the Dare to Connect 2-week trial."
And then she continues. She says, "One night, my husband looked over my shoulder and asked what I was doing. I shared Dare to Connect with him. He tried it, and he's been fully engaged ever since. Steve and Mark's knowledge and experience speak to him, and he has implemented so many of the things that have been suggested. Thank you for your straight, hard-hitting approach. Keep it up. Our marriage has deepened tremendously, and we are stronger than we've ever been, even while working through the mess that this addiction has made. We're happy, loyal, and incredibly grateful D2Cers." We absolutely love these success stories. It's the reason why we do everything that we do in D2C, to help all of you find lasting recovery and healing. So come on over and join us in the D2C program. You can do it with a free 2-week trial, and you find that at daretoconnectnow.com.
Let's talk about that. Like, what gets in the way of truly considering, right, a partner? I mean, there are a lot here, but the first that we probably ought to talk about is the obvious one. We were just never taught it. Nobody showed it to us. It wasn't modeled for us.
Did I have any of the stepfathers that I have, did I ever see them from a heartfelt, genuine, leading out place consider my mother? No, I think I can say that I didn't. That's sad.
Yeah.
They did a lot of good things. They brought home paychecks. They checked the boxes on doing a lot of the basic foundational stuff, but the heartfelt considering, cherishing, you matter to me. You're top of mind. You're top of plate. You're in my mind all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
And in a proactive way, right? Not just, okay, I checked the box. All right, you've been considered today. Wife, consider yourself considered.
I was thinking about you. What's the problem?
See, I put it on my calendar between 11 a.m. and 11:30 today while I took my bathroom break. I considered you. No, it's right. It goes far beyond that, right? It's this it's this being, it goes back to that being chosen concept that we talk about occasionally
Yes.
here on the podcast. We'll get to
Yes.
that in just a minute. So that's one. But then there are these real significant, and these are very real for the men that you are married to, partners who are listening to this, right? Fears around vulnerability.
Mm.
And there are a lot of those. Some of them stem from what Mark just described, right? It because this may not now these may stem from a fear of acceptance ranging all the way to a fears around safety, right? Thoughts or feelings that come up in the culture, for example, like if I'm vulnerable, well, pansies and wusses are vulnerable, right? Like those are the kids that get beat up on the playground, you know? There's that line in Home Alone. I watched Home Alone the other day with my nieces and nephews, you know? And Kevin McAllister, he's talking about things he's gotten for Christmas from the past from with his neighbor. And he says, like, last year I got a sweater with a little bird knitted on it. And he's like, oh, that's really nice of your grandma. He's like, not if you're a kid in the second grade. You get beat up for wearing something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
he talks about that, and it's kind of a funny take on this idea that, for example, men don't cry. My mom grew up. I've talked about my grandfather here more than once on this program. He was an amazing man in so many ways. Possibly the most hardworking individual I have ever encountered. I
Mm.
mean, literally, up until he physically was like basically prohibited from it. The man raised horses and was up at 4:30 in the morning taking care of them. Like, this guy would put anybody to shame. He was born in the wrong area. He should have been born in the Wild West. But when it came to this side of life, this emotional side,
Mm.
not only was he raised in a home where you couldn't cry, where that literally would get you, like, physically would leave you open to physical attack. He taught that same thing in his household with his kids. We don't cry in this household. Like, that was a well understood concept, especially among the boys. Like, that's not on the table. we,
Well, and
we
some
don't do
people
that.
might be listening to that and say, well, what does men crying have to do with considering their partner? We're talking about being sensitive, being
Yes.
more heart-centric, more open, right? Intuiting things.
Any form of connection that you practice with another person, you have to learn from the top down. If I cannot connect with and hold space for my own vulnerable feelings, I cannot do that with another person.
Right, right.
I have to be able to be vulnerable and express emotions internally before I can ever express them with another person.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? That,
exactly.
that that's a fundamental concept in emotional learning.
Well,
Okay.
and some others here, I'll be looked at as weak. Here was a big one for me. I'll be taken advantage of if I get vulnerable and touchy feely and try to pay attention to my feelings.
And how many of you guys have felt that, right? In
Right?
your growing up?
It'll be weaponized. Somebody will turn the table, see it as a weakness, and take advantage of me.
Totally.
Had that happen.
Yep. And sometimes it's even happened in relationships, has it not? For many of you guys who are listening, have you at least felt, whether or not it happened is a matter of conjecture, but have you not felt at least at times? Well, gosh, I've heard this from countless guys. Steve, I remember one time when I tried to open up to my wife and she made that sarcastic comment or that whatever remark, and that's when I quit doing it.
Yep. Yep. I tried it once and it did. I knew it. It didn't work.
In fact, Bernie and I have an example of this. For a long time, when we first got married, I used to clean the bathrooms. When we first got married, we only had one at the time, but we kind of, how you kind of have those divvying up of chores.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, Brittany critiqued it, and to be fair, I was kind of in a fragile ego state. I was still in addiction, but she critiqued it. And one day, I remember after like the second or third time she did it, I literally went to her and I just said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm not cleaning the bathrooms anymore." And I literally stopped and I didn't clean them again for years. Why? Because I felt like I'm trying to put myself out there. Again, I'm emotionally immature, right? I'm trying to put myself out there. I'm trying to whatever. And what are you doing? You're taking this thing that I'm trying to do in my best broken way that's loving, and you're telling me it's not good enough. Well, piss on you. Screw you. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
doing it then.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And again, was that intentional on the part of Brittany? Of course not. Brittany was operating from a place where, oh, I thought a relationship was safe enough where we could joke around about things like that.
Just practical.
That
Yeah,
was not
yeah,
me.
yeah.
That was not me. Right.
Well, as we were preparing for this today, I'm thinking of my grandparents. And because one of the other reasons that we have trouble with this is, guys, this considering our partner from a really heartfelt, intuitive place is cultural issues around
Yes.
giving ground or being wrong or being the weaker sex. Or I remember we look at it now and it's not really funny anymore. It's actually quite shocking. But to look at the ads, both printed ads
Oh
and
my
TV black and
gosh.
white ads from the 50s.
I know what you're talking
The
about.
man comes
Yeah.
home from work. His wife greets him in an evening dress with pearls, and she escorts him to his easy chair, takes off his shoes and puts his slippers on him, gives him his newspaper, and then she goes and vacuums, and then goes and cooks the food, and then she kindly calls him to the table.
Mm.
It's like the guy is a freaking king in his house, and his wife's his slave servant. Those were ads that were very prevalent.
Yes.
And so this cultural side to this is a big part of what gets in the way.
No, I would absolutely agree. And that stuff still permeates into culture today. Right. And depending on where we have listeners all over the globe, literally in over 100, almost 100, just shy of 130 countries as of the last time we checked. And in some parts of the world, specifically like in South America, when you look at machismo culture and other things, this is actually very dominant still
It's very dumb.
with a lot of our listeners. It
And
continues on today very
actually,
strongly.
Steve, our number hit 100 over 195 countries and
Oh,
territories.
sorry. Yeah, I got the number wrong. Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. We're like 10 shy of every country on the planet or something
No,
like that, but
it was pretty
we're
amazing.
getting there. No, I appreciate you saying that, but
Yeah, so
no, it's
that's
very true. It's a real
very true.
barrier, right?
And you put something here that I have to totally agree with. Being vulnerable is uncomfortable.
Yes.
I have not liked it for most of my life.
Yeah.
Expressing feelings, letting someone see me, the whole me, instead of the facades and the masks and the macho and all the rest of it. It's not comfortable. And
It's
what
not
do
comfortable with others, but it's also not comfortable just with ourselves. I mean, think how much
we,
self-loathing and self-hatred we addicts have practiced for years.
huge,
I mean,
huge.
what is it? What is addiction, guys, among whatever else it is? We talk about it on the program all the time. It's an attempt to numb out, escape, medicate, compensate for, right? That's what it's like perpetually, it's like we're like gerbils running on the perpetual escape hamster wheel, trying to get
Yes,
away from ourselves.
yes. Avoid discomfort at all costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. And I added this one as we're kind of looking at what we talked about, and I'm adding this one. Get ready, all addicts in recovery listening. Get ready for the blow. But this is Mark. I came to the place with the help from a lot of mentors and a lot of really, really good people who'd been farther down the track than me. And they said, Mark, the fact that you don't consider your wife in the way that we're talking about, you are accustomed to going it alone. You're accustomed to hunkering down. You're really pretty immature
Mm.
and you have a lot of self-centeredness and selfishness for a lot of good reasons. You learn to just take care of yourself and pull yourself up by your bootstrap, but you're not very good at vulnerable interactions and considering others. You have some maturing to do and some letting go of that old going alone style. That was hard for me to hear.
Well, I'm glad Mark put that in there because it's interesting. When you look at Mark and I's story, our backgrounds in this area are very different, but the experiences that I had around losing a dad and around some other things led me to the same conclusion. It was a
Absolutely.
different path, but the same conclusion. No one is going to have my interests at heart. If it's going to happen, it's up to me.
I got to consider me.
Yep, no one's going to have my back. If this is going to happen, if I'm going to make stuff happen, it's all about Steve.
Yeah, that's right.
Same thing.
Like we said, there's some very good reasons for that,
There are.
but it will be a
Absolutely.
massive barrier if we don't face it and own it to this whole truly considering our partners topic.
Yes. So true. Well, and this is this is not just a barrier, by the way, for addicts, okay? Because now we're going to shift gears. Let's talk about for partners why this is a problem. Because this is not just an
Mm,
addict-centric concept. Partners, for their own set of very valid, but and in some ways similar, but also in some ways unique reasons, also struggle with this, especially partners who have been in a betrayal trauma dynamic with their intimate partner.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's start off with the obvious. We won't spend much time on this because we already kind of covered this with the guys, but the lack of modeling or teaching. That's just not a guy thing. That equally happens to partners that we work with all the time. I grew up in a household where There were either other problem kids that got all the attention, or my mom wasn't emotionally. I am working with one partner right now that I'm thinking of. Her mom wasn't emotionally available. She was caught up in drugs and substance abuse and all sorts of things. There was no one to model this for her.
No.
Her mom was strung out constantly. She as a 6 year old was raising her two younger siblings. Nobody taught
Yep.
her how to do this.
Yep. And I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because for mentoring, you would often think of the example of mentoring for us guys. Well, I didn't have a dad or male figures that showed me how to consider a partner. I also had a mom that I watched closely that she had no emotional bandwidth to consider her partners.
Yep.
And I watched how she did that. So I got the, what would you call it, dismentoring or mismentoring from the male
Yeah,
and female role models
totally.
in my life.
Absolutely. Right. And some of you may even had the opposite. Some people close to me who had some pretty traumatic upbringings, some women that I know, they actually, like Mark said, there was actually not only was there not this modeling, it was actually the opposite. Men will screw you over.
Yes.
Right. I've been through, your dad, the dad you have right now, he's guy number three, and he's rare as crap. And God help you to find, the right one the first time around. I mean, we hear that stuff routinely from
Yep.
partners.
Yep.
So that lack of modeling or teaching, right? Fears around vulnerability. Now, again, that's a similar category to the addicts, but for many of you partners, we know that the tragedy is that you have learned that fear around vulnerability in this relationship. Find
Yes.
others like it, right? I've tried to open up to him. I've shown the most. I've tried to give him a pass. I've tried to. I mean, sadly, Mark and I talk about this often on the program. Both of our wives are examples of I tried to love him into changing,
Yes.
and it almost killed me.
Yes.
Right? I tried to love him, give him a pass, be encouraging, and all that got me was it enabled him. He weaponized it. He took advantage of that kindness and that love and that grace, and he turned it on me.
Yep. Yep. I give him an inch and he takes a mile.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. Right. Yeah, nearly all betrayed partners go through that. And the other side is a legitimate fear. If I start to get vulnerable and consider him and do all these things, am I going to enable the ongoing unwanted behaviors and dynamics in this relationship? Is he going to take my vulnerability and my offers of considering him as permission to keep engaging in his bad behaviors?
Yes.
A lot of times it's true. When my wife would do that, I go, "Oh, we're good. Okay, back to my old stuff because we're
Yeah.
good."
Well, and it's one of the biggest barriers, to be honest with you, that we see in the couples dynamics when we work with couples in our office. Because what we will get is we've got the guy who's operating what? Under the ultimate premise of the boy who cried wolf. I'm serious about recovery. And then he's not. Right. And so what happens? He actually gets serious. He's really invested. And then he goes to try to show the evidence of change to his partner. And what does she say? Yeah, bullshit.
Well, yeah, based on
Nice
history.
try, man. I know how this goes.
Hmm.
I have done this waltz with you before, right? And so what happens? It's that resistance that we're talking about right here. It's been taken advantage of. It's been weaponized. And that can be a real barrier for couples in the early stages of recovery. Is he's trying to say, no, it's real this time. And she's saying again, yeah, boy who cried wolf, man. I've been there
Yeah,
10,000 times. Why should I extend my? Because every time when I have done this in the past, when I have said, hey, nice job. I appreciate that. I still need X, Y, and Z from you. What do you hear? Ba, 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 ba. Nice job. Ba, 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 ba. We're good. Ba, 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 ba. That's what you hear.
yeah.
You selectively hear what you want, and it stops the change process. I have
Or
worked with partners who have outright said that. If
yeah,
I, Steve, I won't give him praise.
yeah, because they're so afraid of what will
They
happen.
are. They're terrified of it.
Yeah, they
And
are.
and in some cases, to be fair, they're also understandably angry, right? But a lot of it is much more, I think, fear driven than it is even anger driven. If I go that road, I know what's coming.
Right. Yeah, and I said, I got used to going it alone. There's betrayed partners learn to go it alone. That's what
Absolutely, they
happened
do.
to my wife. She said, I've got kids to raise. I've got a house to run. I'm on my own. He's off doing whatever that is, and I got to do me. And now you see the drifting apart where we become married singles, we become roommates, we become, two people doing their own stuff. And that's a very big part of what gets in the way of being considered.
There are a lot of cultural issues at play for women as well. And I just want to mention this briefly because we've noticed this. There are, I will, my wife oftentimes refers to me as a feminist, and I think I would agree with her. I really champion women and the women's movement, and I'm a fan of relationships being egalitarian on every front. I don't ascribe to a patriarchy model in relationships at all. But I have noticed that in some areas of culture, thankfully not all, that there is what I would consider, I guess you could say, a toxic feminist movement going on, where we've gone beyond that collaborative, egalitarian, how do we view, connect with, and relate to each other as equals into this world of, I actually watched a really disturbing news clip the other day of a fairly prominent figure here in the US who just outright came out and said, we don't even need men. Why do we need men? Forget men.
Mm,
Men are useless in our culture.
right.
And it was said in some ways tongue in cheek, but that is sadly, and I think that is born from some of what we've talked about before, born from trauma, born from past abuse, born from past being taken advantage of. But that can also play a role. And we're seeing that more and more with younger generations in our clinics.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
something
yeah.
to just be aware of too.
Well, let's talk about this consideration. If I'm a guy in recovery and I'm listening to all this saying, okay, so to really start leading out and getting into the deeper place of considering my partner, why should I do that?
Mm,
And I can tell you from experience, there are myriad benefits of getting into the space of where you can actually consider your partner.
for sure.
Steve, you said at the beginning today, empathy is the gateway to consideration. And empathy, you often say empathy is the gateway to intimacy. Why? Because intimacy is I often say, into me, I'm going to let you see my whole true self. We're going to be intimate, but I'm also going to put myself in a place to see into you. And how am I going to do that? By putting myself in your shoes, by trying to step into your person and your experience. You've got 20 years in a marriage with me as an addict. And if I used to, how did I used to say it to my guys? I'd say, can you step into your partner's body and look back at yourself through her eyes? Now that's a very deeply philosophical concept, but I say it in a real sense. Can I step over into my partner's person, and then inside of her look back at me?
Mm. Yeah.
And in doing so, now can I start to see what it feels like to be her with my past choices and behaviors? And if I can do that, that's what my client did when he walked out to his driveway that day. He stopped and said, let me step into my wife for a moment and let me imagine that I'm looking out the window to see what my husband's doing. He put himself in that place. And when he did, he went, ooh, wow, let me pause, turn around, and go back in the house and talk to her. Right? That level of empathy, walking in another person's shoes, stepping inside with all the history I've put her through for decades of betrayal and selfishness and all the stuff that I've done. How will this situation in this moment impact her with that in mind? Can I look at me through her eyes?
Yeah. No,
That's huge.
it is. It is huge. And it's that emotional component, right? And we talk about that in other podcasts and we'll talk about it more another day, but really being able to, everybody here has heard the adage, nobody cares how much you know unless you know how much you care. Let's personalize that a little bit in this recovery world because we hear this from partners and from addicts to a degree all the time. I don't care how much you know unless I know and I can actually see how much you care.
Yes. How did my wife start to word it when she found her voice and got really healthy? Mark, talk is cheap. Show me.
Yeah, I'm done with this talking crap.
Because I'm a talk. When I wasn't silent or stoic, when I would talk, I could talk.
Yeah. Yeah. I need you not just to intellectually connect with it, like we talked at the beginning. I need you to step as much as possible into the feelings that I am feeling. And again, we have whole podcasts on that, and we will probably do reminder podcasts on that in the future
Yeah.
about what that means and how that looks. But that's where that needs to begin. The last thing, guys, as we wrap up today, consideration, this that we've been talking about today, this is what opens the door to really collaborating,
I love that.
right? A
Yeah.
collaboration is impossible if I don't give a damn about what you think unless you really are connecting with me. But on the flip side, if I feel like you're doing that and you feel that from me and we are both actively working on that, well, now we don't have two ships kind of sailing roughly in tandem and occasionally running into one another. We've got two people forming united front. We link those ships together, and we've got a super secure battleship floating now.
Well, and I really feel that today in my relationship because what do I know? And I've known this, I knew this for decades that my wife had my back. She did.
Yeah.
And in some ways that was enabling to me. So, yeah, she's got me no matter what. But she's got my back and now what's different? And I have her back and she knows I do because I've shown it over and over and over. And when you've got each other's backs and that's your top priority, now you can let go of hunkering down and taking care of you because, my partner's got me and
Yep.
I've got her. Guess what? We can collaborate now.
Yeah.
That is a powerful place. And Steve, you used the word, I think earlier today, where does this whole consideration, I consider you and I show you by my actions that I do. Now I'm creating the environment where you can feel chosen and cherished. Chosen and cherished. How many betrayed partners have we worked with, Steve, who literally begged for those two things?
Yep.
I want to know that you choose me and that you cherish me.
Absolutely. Well, guys, there's obviously more to say on this subject, which is why we will keep doing this podcast. If you we've gone way over time from what we usually do. If you like what you hear on the PBSC podcast, guys, you will love what's in Dare to Connect. If you are, we're heading into, as of the date of this recording, we're heading into 2025.
Mm.
We talked a couple of weeks ago in Dare to Connect, and we had a really cool discussion. I think it was with the addicts, where I shared a story. I'm going to share just the quick version of it right now with all of you. I heard from another guy in recovery one day. We were sitting in a meeting together, and this was early on before I was even sober, I believe. And he said, "Steve, there really is a last time."
Mm-hmm.
And I love that concept. To any of the guys listening here, there is really a last time. Mine was October 13th, 2014. When do you want yours to be?
A last relapse, a
Yep.
last.
There's a last epic fight where you bring up divorce. There's a last time where where your wife has to look at you with that fear in her eyes that you all know what I'm talking about. For you partners, there's a last time where you have to see that really scary side of him. Right? There are lots of last times in this. Don't let another year go by doing this. If you and your partner are in a place where both of you are serious, come and join Dare to Connect. DareToConnectNow.com. You can grab a 2-week free trial of the program. We'd love to have you come join us, take a look at what's going on, and let us help you show you your last time. We'd love to have you come. And again, you can find that at DareToConnectNow.com and grab the 2-week trial there. And for those who are, if you're still continuing to listen to the podcast, and if you've listened thus far, you probably will be, you can always send us submissions for addressing questions in a limited fashion here on the program at pbscpodcast.com. When you go there now, it actually redirects to the Dare to Connect site, but up at the top, there's just a banner you click on that says, take me to the PBSC page. And then there's a contact form at the bottom. You can just send the questions into us.
Send them on through.
So,
yep. And not to pun, but as we said, please consider
yes,
joining us in D2C, Dare to Connect.
absolutely. We'd love to have you come on over, guys. We hope that you have a great, safe rest of the week. We appreciate you being here in this podcast as we here at PBSC and more especially Dare to Connect as we work to revolutionize the way recovery is done, the way betrayal, trauma, and addiction are handled in this arena. We hope to see you in D2C soon. Have a great rest of your week, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.